On a quiet Sunday morning in the suburban neighborhood of Willow Creek, Maryland, the tranquility was shattered by the piercing wail of sirens. The call had come in at 7:43 a.m., a woman found unresponsive in her luxurious two-story home on Maple Drive. The house, framed by manicured lawns and tall oak trees, stood as a testament to the American dream. But inside, it held a darker story. The victim, identified as 35-year-old Laura Bennett, was discovered by her neighbor, Mrs. Caroline Fisher. Laura's lifeless body lay sprawled at the foot of the grand staircase, her face pale and bruised. There was blood seeping from a wound on the back of her head, staining the polished hardwood floor beneath her. Paramedics confirmed her death at the scene. Detective Mark Hollis, a seasoned investigator with over 20 years on the force, was assigned to the case. Known for his meticulous attention to detail, Hollis arrived at the Bennett residence within the hour. The house was eerily silent, the morning sun casting long shadows across the pristine interior. The crime scene was quickly secured. Hollis began his initial assessment, noting the signs of a struggle in the living room. A shattered vase lay near an overturned armchair, and a trail of blood droplets led from the foyer to the staircase. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the victim knew her attacker. Laura Bennett was a well-known figure in the community, admired for her charitable work and vibrant social life. She was married to Richard Bennett, a successful real estate developer. Friends and neighbors described them as the perfect couple, living the life many aspired to, but perfection often masks imperfections. Richard Bennett arrived at the scene shortly after Hollis, visibly distraught. His alibi was that he had been at the gym during the time of the incident. His clothes were damp with sweat, and his hands trembled as he answered preliminary questions. He claimed to have last seen Laura the previous evening before going to bed. The autopsy report later revealed that Laura had suffered blunt force trauma to the back of her head, consistent with being struck with a heavy object. Additionally, there were defensive wounds on her arms, indicating she had fought back against her attacker. The time of death was estimated between 6 a.m. and 7 a.m. Hollis reviewed security footage from neighboring houses. A camera from across the street captured Richard leaving the house at 5:45 a.m., earlier than he claimed. This discrepancy raised immediate red flags. Furthermore, Hollis discovered Laura's phone hidden under the couch, its screen cracked but still functional. The phone contained a series of heated messages exchanged between Laura and an unknown woman, later identified as Vanessa Clark. The messages revealed that Laura had recently confronted Vanessa, suspecting her of having an affair with Richard. The confrontation had occurred just 2 days before Laura's death. Digging deeper, Hollis uncovered financial records showing large, unexplained transfers from Richard's accounts to an unknown recipient. The trail led to Vanessa, who worked as an event planner in the city. Interviews with friends revealed that Laura had been increasingly suspicious of Richard's behavior, describing late nights, secretive phone calls, and sudden business trips. Hollis visited Vanessa at her downtown apartment. She appeared nervous, her eyes darting as she answered questions. She admitted to knowing Richard but claimed their relationship was strictly professional. However, inconsistencies in her story and the discovery of a hidden photo of her and Richard at an intimate dinner told a different tale. The evidence was mounting. Richard's alibi was shaky, his financial dealings suspicious, and his connection to Vanessa undeniable. But Hollis knew better than to jump to conclusions. He needed concrete proof to unravel the truth behind Laura Bennett's death. As Hollis pieced together the puzzle, he couldn't shake the feeling that this case was more than just a crime of passion. Beneath the surface of affluence and charm, a web of deceit, betrayal, and hidden motives was waiting to be uncovered, and he was determined to expose every dark secret. Detective Mark Hollis returned to his office with Laura Bennett's case file weighing heavily on his mind. The inconsistencies in Richard's statements and Vanessa's nervous demeanor painted a picture of deception. Hollis began dissecting every detail, searching for overlooked clues. The case file contained photographs from the crime scene, autopsy reports, and transcripts of initial interviews. Hollis decided to re-examine Laura's personal belongings retrieved from the house. Her journal, tucked away in the drawer of her bedside table, caught his attention. Flipping through its pages, Hollis found entries filled with suspicions about Richard's late-night absences and emotional detachment. The most recent entry, dated the night before her death, hinted at a confrontation. "Tomorrow I will have answers. No more lies." The forensic team's report provided additional insights. They discovered partial fingerprints on the shattered vase, not matching Richard or Laura. Hollis ordered a comparison against Vanessa's prints, obtained during her interview. The results came back positive. Vanessa's fingerprints were on the vase, contradicting her claim of not visiting the Bennett's home. Surveillance footage from Richard's office parking lot showed his car arriving much later than he claimed, further weakening his alibi. His phone records revealed multiple calls to Vanessa around the time of Laura's death. Hollis obtained a warrant to search Richard's financial documents more thoroughly, uncovering a hidden account with frequent transfers to Vanessa. Interviewing Laura's close friend, Jessica Morgan, shed more light. Jessica revealed that Laura had confided in her about Richard's affair and mentioned feeling threatened after confronting Vanessa. Jessica described Laura's fear and determination to uncover the truth, despite Richard's dismissive attitude. Hollis returned to Vanessa's apartment with new evidence. Her demeanor shifted from nervous to defensive. Confronted with the fingerprints and financial links, Vanessa broke down, admitting she had been at the Bennett's house the morning Laura died. She claimed it was to talk things out. However, her story didn't align with the autopsy report indicating deliberate force. Hollis suspected Richard's involvement went deeper than just an affair. Motivated by jealousy, financial greed, or fear of exposure, Richard had more to lose than Vanessa. Hollis arranged for another interview with Richard. This time, the questions were pointed, backed by the mounting evidence. Richard's composure cracked under pressure. His responses grew inconsistent, his frustration evident. Hollis noticed subtle signs: sweaty palms, avoidance of eye contact, and defensive body language. Reviewing Richard's phone GPS data provided the final piece of the puzzle. His movements placed him near his home around the estimated time of Laura's death, contradicting his gym alibi. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Richard's facade crumbled. The investigation revealed a chilling truth. Richard and Vanessa had conspired to eliminate Laura. Financial gain, fear of scandal, and a twisted sense of freedom drove their actions. Laura's confrontation had threatened to unravel their carefully crafted lies, leading to a fatal decision. Hollis meticulously documented the findings, ensuring every detail was accounted for. The case, once shrouded in mystery, now stood as a testament to relentless investigation and the unmasking of hidden truths. But for Hollis, it was another reminder of how easily perfection can conceal darkness. The detective knew the case wasn't over just because Richard and Vanessa's involvement had come to light. There were still questions about the sequence of events, and Hollis was determined to ensure justice was served. The evidence was strong, but he needed to understand the motive fully and uncover any hidden layers of deceit. Hollis began by reconstructing the timeline of the crime. He reviewed security footage from nearby traffic cameras, noting the movements of Richard's car early that morning. His vehicle was seen leaving the neighborhood and returning shortly after, contradicting his claim of heading straight to the gym. This suggested Richard had left to create a false alibi, then returned home to commit the crime or assist Vanessa. Next, Hollis focused on financial motives. A deeper investigation into Richard's accounts revealed substantial debts and risky investments hidden beneath the facade of a successful business. Laura's name was tied to several of these ventures, meaning her death could benefit Richard financially through insurance claims and the removal of her control over shared assets. Hollis requested Laura's life insurance policy details. The policy was significant, with Richard listed as the sole beneficiary. The timing of increased coverage, just months before her death, raised suspicions. Hollis theorized that financial desperation, coupled with the affair, created the perfect storm that led to Laura's murder. Further analysis of Vanessa's phone records revealed text messages exchanged with Richard discussing plans that hinted at premeditation. Phrases like, "It will be over soon," and "We just need to stick to the plan," painted a damning picture. These messages, coupled with the financial evidence, pointed to a conspiracy rather than a crime of passion. The case against Richard was solidified when Hollis discovered a hidden recording device in Laura's home office. Laura had been documenting her suspicions, and the final recording captured part of her confrontation with Richard. The audio revealed Richard's volatile temper, threats, and a chilling admission. "You think you can control me? You'll regret this." With the evidence stacked against them, Richard and Vanessa were formally charged with Laura's murder. The prosecution built a case highlighting their motive, opportunity, and conspiracy. Hollis ensured every detail was meticulously presented, leaving no room for doubt. For Hollis, the case was more than solving a crime. It was about uncovering the truth hidden beneath layers of deceit. As he closed the case file, he reflected on the fragile facade of perfection that often hides the darkest secrets. And he knew, somewhere out there, another case waited, another truth to uncover. Detective Mark Hollis sat in his dimly lit office, the glow from his desk lamp casting long shadows across the piles of evidence he meticulously reviewed. The case against Richard Bennett and Vanessa Clark was strong, but Hollis knew the foundation of any successful prosecution rested not just on evidence, but on establishing a clear, undeniable motive. He needed to understand what drove them to commit such a brutal act. Hollis began by diving deeper into Richard's financial affairs. Detailed bank statements, investment portfolios, and loan documents painted a stark picture. Richard was drowning in debt from failed business ventures, masked by a facade of success. Despite his image as a prosperous real estate developer, his empire was crumbling under the weight of poor decisions and mounting liabilities. Laura Bennett had been the financial backbone, her inheritance, and savvy investments keeping them afloat. With her out of the picture, Richard stood to gain significantly from her life insurance policy and full control over their joint assets. The life insurance policy became a focal point. Hollis scrutinized the documents, noting an alarming detail. The policy had been amended 6 months prior, increasing Laura's coverage substantially, with Richard as the sole beneficiary. This change coincided with the timeline when Richard and Vanessa's affair likely intensified, suggesting premeditation. Hollis consulted with a forensic accountant who confirmed that Richard's financial situation had reached a critical point around the same time the policy was updated. Turning his attention to Vanessa, Hollis uncovered layers of manipulation woven into her relationship with Richard. Interviews with Vanessa's friends and colleagues painted a picture of a woman enamored and emotionally entangled with a man who promised her a future free from the shadows of his marriage. Text messages between the two revealed not just affection, but discussions hinting at frustration and desperation, with Richard often lamenting about Laura being an obstacle to their happiness. Hollis revisited the crime scene photos, looking for anything he might have missed. One detail nagged at him. The positioning of Laura's body and the nature of her injuries suggested more than a spontaneous act of violence. The precision of the blow to the back of her head indicated intent, not an accident fueled by rage. Forensic analysis confirmed that the wound was consistent with being struck by a heavy, blunt object from a calculated angle, further supporting the theory of premeditation. He decided to re-interview Richard, this time with a different approach. Instead of focusing on the crime, Hollis zeroed in on Richard's financial troubles, confronting him with the evidence of his debts, the life insurance policy changes, and his manipulative texts to Vanessa. Richard maintained his composure initially, but subtle cracks appeared, hesitations, deflections, and a fleeting moment of panic when confronted with the insurance documents. Simultaneously, Vanessa was brought in for a follow-up interrogation. This time, faced with irrefutable evidence of Richard's deceit and manipulation, she broke down. Tears streamed down her face as she recounted how Richard had painted a picture of a life they could share if Laura was no longer in the way. He convinced her that Laura was the source of all his problems, that they could start fresh with the money from the insurance and his business free from Laura's influence. Vanessa's confession was detailed. She described the morning of the murder, how Richard had orchestrated the plan. He left the house under the guise of going to the gym, creating an alibi, while Vanessa arrived shortly after to confront Laura. The confrontation turned violent when Laura threatened to expose their affair. Richard returned home, finding Laura injured but still alive. In a calculated decision, he delivered the fatal blow, ensuring she wouldn't survive to testify against him. The confession, combined with the forensic evidence and financial records, solidified the case. Hollis meticulously documented every detail, preparing for trial. The motive was clear: greed, desperation, and a toxic relationship built on lies and manipulation. As Hollis closed his notebook, he reflected on the complexity of human nature. Love twisted by deceit, ambition tainted by greed, and lives destroyed by the very people meant to cherish them. The case of Laura Bennett was more than just a murder. It was a tragic testament to how far people would go when blinded by desire and desperation. The courtroom buzzed with a tense, expectant energy as the trial of Richard Bennett and Vanessa Clark commenced. Reporters filled the gallery, their notepads poised to capture every revelation. The prosecution had meticulously built their case, leaning heavily on the evidence Detective Mark Hollis had unearthed. Despite the overwhelming proof, Hollis knew that trials were unpredictable. The defense would exploit any weakness, any gap, to sway the jury. The prosecution opened with a compelling narrative. They painted Richard as a man driven by greed, drowning in debt, and willing to sacrifice his wife for financial gain. Vanessa was portrayed as a willing accomplice, manipulated by promises of love and a future together. The jury listened intently as the prosecutor outlined the timeline of events, the financial motives, and the damning evidence that connected the dots. Hollis was called as a key witness. Taking the stand, he recounted the investigation with precision. He described the crime scene, the forensic findings, and the trail of evidence leading to Richard and Vanessa. His testimony was clear and methodical, laying out the facts without embellishment. The defense attempted to discredit him, questioning the thoroughness of his investigation, but Hollis remained composed, his experience evident in his calm, factual responses. The prosecution presented the forensic evidence next. Experts detailed how the wound on Laura's head indicated a deliberate, forceful blow. They explained the significance of Vanessa's fingerprints on the shattered vase and the inconsistencies in Richard's alibi. The financial expert highlighted Richard's desperate monetary situation and the suspicious changes to Laura's life insurance policy. Vanessa's confession was a pivotal moment. The recording of her statement was played for the jury, her voice trembling as she recounted the events leading to Laura's death. The confession corroborated the physical evidence, Richard's financial records, and the timeline established by the prosecution. Her emotional breakdown in the recording added a raw human element that words alone couldn't convey. The defense countered with a narrative of their own. They portrayed Richard as a grieving husband, a victim of circumstance rather than a perpetrator. They claimed Vanessa acted alone, driven by jealousy and unrequited love. Richard's defense attorney argued that the financial evidence was circumstantial and that Richard's inconsistent alibi was a result of shock and confusion, not guilt. Richard took the stand in his own defense. His demeanor was calm and calculated. He expressed sorrow for Laura's death, painting himself as a man devastated by loss. He admitted to the affair but denied any involvement in the murder. Under cross-examination, his composure faltered slightly, especially when confronted with the incriminating text messages and discrepancies in his alibi. His explanations seemed rehearsed, lacking genuine emotion. The prosecution's closing argument was powerful. They reminded the jury of the overwhelming evidence, the financial motive, the forensic proof, Vanessa's confession, and Richard's deceit. They emphasized the tragic betrayal of Laura Bennett, a woman who trusted the very people who plotted her demise. The defense's closing argument focused on doubt. They urged the jury to consider the possibility of Vanessa acting alone, manipulating Richard with lies and seduction. They highlighted the lack of direct evidence placing Richard at the scene at the exact moment of Laura's death. After days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. The courtroom was silent as the four persons stood, the weight of justice in their hands. Richard Bennett was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Vanessa Clark was also found guilty of second-degree murder and conspiracy. As the verdict was read, Richard's stoic facade finally crumbled. Vanessa sobbed quietly, her face a mask of regret and despair. Detective Mark Hollis watched from the back of the courtroom, his expression unreadable. The case was over, and justice was served. But the scars left behind were permanent. Hollis left the courthouse, the crisp autumn air filling his lungs. He reflected on the case, the lives lost, and the darkness hidden beneath the veneer of perfection. Justice had been delivered, but it was a hollow victory in the face of such senseless tragedy. The trial of Richard Bennett and Vanessa Clark had ended, but the ripple effects of their crime lingered like an unwelcome shadow over the town. The media frenzy slowly faded, replaced by the quiet sorrow etched into the lives of those left behind. Detective Mark Hollis returned to his routine, but the case haunted him, its layers of betrayal and greed a constant echo in his mind. Hollis sat at his desk, reviewing the final case files before closing them for good. The pages detailed every grim discovery, every piece of evidence meticulously catalogued. The facts were clear, justice had been served, but Hollis knew that justice did not equate to closure. Laura Bennett's life had been reduced to reports, photographs, and courtroom testimonies, her memory now confined within manila folders and archived evidence boxes. Laura's family struggled to piece their lives back together. Her parents attended grief counseling, grappling with the loss of their daughter and the horrifying betrayal by the man they had welcomed into their family. They established a scholarship fund in Laura's name, hoping to create something positive from their tragedy. Hollis attended the small dedication ceremony, standing quietly in the back, his presence unnoticed, but his heart heavy with unspoken sympathy. Richard Bennett adjusted to life behind bars with the same arrogance he carried in the courtroom. Reports from the prison indicated he maintained his charm, manipulating fellow inmates and staff with calculated ease. But beneath the facade, he faced the harsh reality of his choices. A life stripped of freedom, luxury, and the power he once wielded. Vanessa Clark's fate was different. Prison broke her spirit quickly. The guilt of her actions, compounded by the betrayal she felt from Richard, consumed her. She wrote letters from her cell, filled with apologies that would never reach Laura's family. Hollis read one of the letters, forwarded by the district attorney's office. It was a desperate attempt at redemption, filled with regret and self-loathing, but it changed nothing. Hollis visited Laura's grave one quiet afternoon. The cemetery was peaceful, the winter air crisp and still. He stood in silence, reflecting on the woman whose life had been so senselessly stolen. The headstone was simple, adorned with fresh flowers left by her grieving family. Hollis didn't believe in closure, not really, but standing there he found a moment of peace, a silent acknowledgement of the justice served, however incomplete. Back at the precinct, life moved on. New cases filled Hollis's desk, each with its own complexities and heartbreaks. But the Bennett case lingered in the back of his mind, a reminder of the fragility of trust and the darkness that could lurk behind the most familiar faces. He often found himself replaying the investigation, wondering if there had been signs they missed, clues that could have saved Laura. In the end, the case was a testament to the worst of human nature: greed, betrayal, and the capacity for violence masked by charm and deceit. But it also highlighted resilience, the unwavering pursuit of truth, the strength of those left to pick up the pieces, and the silent, enduring work of justice carried out by people like Hollis. As he closed the final file, Hollis knew the story was over, but the lessons it taught would remain with him. In the quiet moments between cases when the office was empty and the only sound was the hum of city life beyond his window, he thought of Laura Bennett, not as a victim, but as a person whose life had meaning beyond the tragedy of her death. Months passed since the conclusion of the Bennett case, but its shadow lingered in the corners of Detective Mark Hollis's mind. It was a case unlike many others, not just because of its complexity, but because of the raw human emotions that wove through every piece of evidence, every testimony, and every heart left broken in its wake. Hollis found himself often reflecting on the investigation, not as a matter of professional accomplishment, but as a profound lesson in human nature. The case had been a stark reminder that evil does not always announce itself with sinister faces or violent threats. Sometimes, it hides behind charming smiles, polite gestures, and familiar voices. At the precinct, Hollis resumed his daily routines, diving into new cases that demanded his attention. Yet, the Bennett file remained on his mind, a symbol of both justice served and lives irreparably damaged. He shared quiet conversations with younger detectives, offering insights drawn from the case, not as cautionary tales, but as lessons etched into his experience. Hollis began compiling notes, not for official records, but for himself. He documented the subtle signs he had learned to recognize, the inconsistencies in alibis, the hidden motives masked by outward appearances, and the psychological profiles that often pointed to deeper truths. His notes were a personal ledger of lessons paid for in the currency of human tragedy. Visiting Laura Bennett's family became a quiet ritual. He didn't go often, just enough to show that her life mattered beyond the courtroom verdict. Her parents appreciated his silent support, their grief slowly transforming into a quiet resilience. The scholarship fund they established in Laura's name flourished, turning a symbol of loss into a beacon of hope for young students pursuing their dreams. Meanwhile, Richard Bennett faded into the obscurity of prison life, his influence reduced to fleeting moments of manipulation within confined walls. Reports occasionally crossed Hollis's desk, detailing Richard's disciplinary infractions or failed appeals. Each one served as a grim reminder of a man who had everything yet chose betrayal and murder over decency. Vanessa Clark, however, remained a figure of tragic complexity. Her attempts at redemption through letters and counseling in prison painted the portrait of someone who could not escape the weight of her guilt. Hollis sometimes wondered if her remorse was genuine or just another facet of her manipulative tendencies. Regardless, it was irrelevant. Laura was gone, and no amount of regret could change that. Hollis also took time to reflect on his role as an investigator. The case reinforced his belief in thoroughness, patience, and the relentless pursuit of truth. It reminded him that justice isn't always about dramatic courtroom victories. Often, it's found in the meticulous assembly of facts, the quiet interviews, the sleepless nights spent analyzing evidence. As the anniversary of Laura Bennett's death approached, Hollis found himself standing once again by her grave. The winter chill mirrored the somber weight in his heart. He placed a small bouquet of white lilies beside the headstone, a simple gesture to honor a life taken too soon. Standing there, he felt the culmination of the case's lessons settle within him. Lessons about trust, deception, and the fragile nature of human relationships. Back at the precinct, Hollis closed the final chapter of his notes on the Bennett case. He titled it Reflections and Lessons, not as an official report, but as a personal testament to a case that had changed him. He knew he would carry the memories with him, not as burdens, but as guideposts for every future investigation. In the end, the story of Richard Bennett, Vanessa Clark, and Laura Bennett was more than a tale of crime and punishment. It was a narrative about the darkness people can harbor and the light that persists through the pursuit of justice. For Detective Mark Hollis, it was a story that, despite its tragedy, reaffirmed his purpose to seek the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried.